Over the last several months, my guests and I have been doing deep dive videos covering the explosion of humanoid bots and bots with brains. Scott Walter is back with us again, this time going into more depth about the business model for Tesla's Optimus humanoid robot. He'll be sharing his calculations for the value of the bots and comparing the cost of the bots to total cost of labor. What happens if the bot can do one shift, two shifts, or what happens if it's three shifts? He'll review what he calls the Scott bot model, saved costs of Teslabot Transition. Scott has co-founded two robotic companies in the past and has been studying the new bots coming to the market. Thank you very much, Scott. Really appreciate you coming on again and doing more and more of these deep dives with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Herbert. It's nice to be back.
I love these bot videos that we've been doing. They're doing very well. We're basically getting a good sized group of audience that are very interested in this. And as we know, there's just an explosion and it's coming and it's here.
It is.
And it's just going to become even more exciting as the weeks and the months go by. And so you basically put together a bot model trying to understand how would actually companies buy the Tesla bot? Why would they buy it? What would the cost be? Would it be one shift, two shifts? How many humans could it replace? I just interviewed Cern Basher, and he's a financial analyst, and he did amazing. He's got many different models, and he also did a bot model, which is very shocking in terms of the impact of the market cap for Tesla. And then he and you worked together to put together this bot model. So I saw that you tweeted this out, and I'll just sort of set the stage here, that you shared your new Scott model because CERN had his
CERN model. Yeah.
CERN model. It's just for fun. You guys are having fun with using your names as the kind of name for this. A save costs of Teslabot Transition, and he helped you with these charts and your conversation. So let me walk you through some of the things you said that are very shocking or very interesting that we need to think about. So you said, okay, if it's a one shift scenario, and really, it's really going to be just competing, you think, at the very beginning with the minimum wage jobs that Optimus can compete with. And that's the first assumption. But when you're performing two or three shifts, it becomes really cost effective at that point. That's the interesting value prop that these Optimus can do versus a human. So it says here, Optimus is instantly competitive to the higher tiered salaries, assuming that Optimus is capable to perform those tasks, which is not likely at first. So I will ask you this later at the end of the kind of the ending of this, kind of closer to the end here, of how could and what is Optimus must have skills to do the higher tiered salaries. But this is the interesting one. So you say that you're assuming a one-to-one swap. Okay, one Optimus for one human per task. Early on, maybe two Optimi per human, depending on performance. Longer term, it could actually could flip to one Optimus for one. Oh, sorry. Yeah, to two Optimi per human. Right. Mm-hmm. And then, sorry, I'm getting confused here. The flip to one Optimus for 1.5 to 2 humans. So explain to me what's going on here.
Okay. So at first, we're not sure that Optimus is going to be as fast as a human. And a lot of times when you set up a workstation, you're trying to get the maximum utilization out of your worker. So they're not idle a lot. And if you remember, again, that Shanghai video where we can see the operator is responsible for two stations, just kind of bouncing back between the two, that's an example of a task that can be handled by one person. But if the bot's really slow, then you might have to have two bots there. The thing is, you don't have to pay both bots the same salary that you are the human. And so it might be that you need two bots to replace one human. But eventually it might get to the stage that you could have set up those stations that operator could be responsible for three stations, but that's pushing them to the limit to 100%. And if you've got a bot that's able to go, let's say 110, 120% of what a human is able to do, suddenly the bot's doing three stations. So that means, okay, they're as good as 1.5 humans. And then if they go maybe even a little bit faster, then maybe they're able to replace two. And so at first, we don't expect the bot's going to have that much dexterity and be able to do, let's say, very intricate kind of things, such as, putting some of the cabling in where you have to crawl in the car, stuff like that. And those are typically the higher wage ones versus operator just loading the sheet metal, which is a really kind of very basic entry level kind of position. So that means those workers will be able to compete with Optimus, and they won't necessarily be displaced unless Optimus is able to have a slight edge. And those that are a little bit higher up may not have to worry at first until Optimus builds that skill set that allows it to go in there. And so that's why we're looking at it, is that at first, if it's a one-to-one swap out, then Optimus is going to be kind of break even. But when you go to two shifts, so remember, you're trying to run that operation not just for 8 hours, but maybe for 16 hours or 24 hours, or if you look at like on weekends and stuff like that, you can say there's a 3-shift model in there. Suddenly, it's like that one Optimus is able to replace 3 workers or the salaries of 3 workers. And then it becomes very competitive very quickly. And then you can see even those lower tier jobs are kind of like, we don't need them anymore. We're going to have to preserve those workers that maybe have the higher skill because the bot's not able to do it. And then longer term, it can get even scarier, because if you look at overall headcount, you could reduce the headcount significantly, and not necessarily a ratio of 1-to-1. It could be in the extreme, like 1-to-6. So, just imagine you've got 6,000 workers and suddenly you replace them, but you don't need 6,000 Optimus. You might be able to do it with 1,000 Optimus. So this is a factor that I think everyone needs to kind of bring into account when they look at it. And again,
Yeah.
looking back at the model, I'm an engineer, so I look at the things from the capability and doing, some basic cost models to get an idea of what the expense is, and not necessarily looking at what is the business case for it. That's for people who are more business oriented doing it. But, get a spreadsheet, a little bit about math, you can go ahead and do that. So I came up with some original numbers that we shared previously on a couple other episodes. But I knew it's like, I really want someone to take a look at it that knows a little bit more about finances and everything else. And it turns out CERN lives only about half hour, 45 minutes from me. So
Okay.
we've been talking back and forth, and he's always having fun with the acronyms. So he's got the CERN model and the BOTS model and the fumes model. And I'll take credit for the fumes because he was thinking of GAST or something like that. And I said, fumes, try that one. And then he
I
was able
love
to
it.
work out the acronym. We're still working on Herb or Herbert, don't worry. So uh, we're not sure. So, but don't forget, I've got the herbs and spices one already
I
figured
love that
out for
one.
you, right? Yeah. So he is able to go in because he knows a lot more. So I had like some very simple wage structures and assumed what the FICA and everything else was. And he really broke it down to like, this is
Yeah.
what you actually would be paying all the different employees to get an idea what the costs are. And then he started folding in some other potential assumptions. So if you remember at first, my model was like not an exterior model to Tesla. It was like cost saved
Right.
within Tesla.
Yeah.
And we know eventually that the bots are going to go outside. And then when Tesla starts doing that, what's the revenue that's coming in there? And that's like a model I didn't really want to touch yet. He's like, well, that could be years away. And I'm really looking at what is the short-term benefit of Optimus to Tesla in the business case and in margins in the end. But CERN was sort of confident to take a little bit further. And there's all this discussion. Is he going to sell Optimus? Are you going to lease it? Elon has said, $20,000, but that's more like eventually $20,000. But at first it would be, I always said, fiduciary irresponsibility or malpractice if you lease it out for like, $10,000 or $20,000 a year when people would be willing to spend like 50, 60, $100,000. And so, our guesstimate is that it'll be leased at first when it goes out between $50,000 and $60,000. And there's a lot of reasons why you would go for a leasing model as far as the sales model. I mean, you just have better control and everything else and making sure the robot's not abused and some of the applications that you might find unsavory, you're able to control that. And plus, it becomes, as a service model, which means you've got continual revenue coming on in. So we looked at that and then put in other assumptions that, oh, there's going to be taxation, there's going to be maintenance, there's going to be everything else. So it's very, very conservative what the costs are. And I think in the end, CERN would say the numbers are nutty. So the interview he had with you was absolutely great. That was one of the few interviews that, I listened from end to end at normal speed because it was really that good. Even though I had pretty good understanding what I was already talking about, it was worthwhile. And anyone who hasn't seen that interview definitely should, because that kind of gives you an idea of where we're coming from when we look at this particular model for the bots. And so right now we're kind of talking a few numbers here. I'm waving my hands. There are a couple of charts out there that might make a better impact to everyone to sort of see what we're really talking about when you compare Optimus to an actual worker.
Hey there, thank you for joining me. If you can, please consider supporting this channel so I can keep it going. It's a lot of work arranging all these amazing interviews. One of the easiest ways is just to click that join button and become a member of the channel. Thank you very much, and let's get brighter.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I do think that this is worthy that you guys have really started to give this some thought, right?
Mhm.
So, with the first point that you made was that at the beginning, when Optimus is just rolled out, it may not be very fast. It's going to be very, very slow. So
Mhm.
yours, that's now I understand what you were saying, which is it might actually do half the work of a human because it's much
Yeah.
slower in moving. And so it really is that, but eventually it could be so much faster. It can move faster, right? And because it can work 3 shifts, it could replace 6 humans, is what you've estimated. It could actually get that
Potentially. I mean,
potentially,
maybe
potentially
even more. So I was like being conservative, like up
just
to six. If I say 10 or something crazy
yeah,
like that, but you never know.
unbelievable. Right, right. So that was the first thing you guys mentioned, and then the second thing you're talking about is, the idea that the very likelihood, if you sit down and think about this, Tesla's not going to sell bots. They're not going to sell bots to anybody. It's all going to be leased. Tesla will own the bot, then they'll give you a monthly lease to be able to use the bot. They may or may not sell you tasks, skill sets that the bot's limited to be able to do. You might pay you extra for the monthly fee to train it to be able to do special tasks that you need and want. But it's very likely that they'll lease it. That part, it was fun to talk to CERN about that because he was saying, Tesla does not want anybody to buy 1,000 bots, create a bot army, and
Yeah.
attack some company or some whatever person, company, country.
Yeah.
And you can use it for, like you said earlier, untoward kind of activities,
Unsavory. Yeah. Whatever.
unsavory,
Yeah.
and they don't want that. So it makes sense. Okay, so based on those assumptions, and again, if you're an audience member, it's fun. Sit down and think about this, join us, and then your assumption might be different than ours, but at least we're starting the conversation. So those were
Yeah.
very good points you brought up. Now, the other kind of like assumptions you guys were making. So first, you said 60,000 annual lease rate. You think that that might be
That could
high?
be high. A lot of people have guessed maybe around 50, but CERN just said, let's just go ahead and put 60 in there and see how that compares.
Yeah.
The other assumption is that there's probably going to be some sort of tax at some
Okay,
point.
well, yeah. Before we move on, I mean, if you're paying a bot, the lease for the bot costs you 60,000. Depend the low waged employee is over 60,000 per year because if you add in
Yeah,
their
they're right around there.
benefits, what's
Hmm.
that?
They're right around there. Yeah, yeah. In the end, yeah,
Okay, and then that's where it matters in terms of shifts. If you had one bot that could do 3 shifts instead of one employee doing one shift, you're now going to save $120,000 per year versus right instead of like costing you
yes,
60
yes,
60.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and that yeah, if you but you have to add in all of the benefits and tools and whatever, the training,
Overhead,
whatever.
everything. Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, in terms of taxes, this was another very interesting assumption that you and CERN brought up. This idea that it's very unlikely or very highly likely that a government, a city, a state is going to tax these bots because they are going to replace humans, and he was pretty generous with 33% tax rate on these bots. What was your comment about taxes?
Yeah, we don't know. It's really nebulous, but there already are similar taxes on equipment in many tax jurisdictions. So you are required every year within your factory or an office to go through all the equipment you have in there, whether it be automation or printers or anything else, find out what its cost, what the depreciation is, and you are taxed on it. It's like a property tax. So that already exists in a lot of tax jurisdictions, including on the industrial robots would be out there because they're a piece of capital equipment. It may be a little bit different because now it's going from it's a form of automation to kind of a form of labor, and we tax labor a particular way. And how would they do that? It's not clear. Are they going to go to an hourly model, a salaried model? Because Optimus doesn't work by hours; it works with a annual salary. But something's going to happen in there, and we don't know if it's going to be a small tax, like 10% or a little bit more. So we just said make it like the same that they're doing on labor, which generally is around 33%, especially when you include, FICA and everything else in there. So we could be high, we could be low. But we just wanted to make sure it was sort of in the model in some way, and that you just go to the spreadsheet and you change it if you think the assumption is going to, no, it's going to be 45%. But I have a feeling it's not going to be too high, because then companies, or let's say tax jurisdictions, are going to compete for business. They're going to say, wait, bring your factory over here. We're only 20%, we're not 40% like those guys over there. So that means it cannot get completely nutty, but at the same time, there's going to be something. There has to be something. And we just don't know what it's going to be as workers start to get displaced.
Yeah, it actually makes a ton of sense, and I'm so happy that he added taxes. Even with the taxes, Tesla still, the business model is still nutty. It's crazy how much money they're going to make. The amount of money that the state itself is going to make with the taxes is also crazy nutty. And so they are motivated to actually go this path. And then this hopefully creates some sort of, cash cushion money that the government can use to support the displaced workers. It's part of the parcel. If you're going to roll up bots, hey, there's going to be, riots in the streets if everybody lost their jobs, or a certain class of people lose their jobs. So I love that he did that. So I'm glad that you guys really thought this through. Now, the other thing that we need to talk about is you do have a line item for Optimus benefits and overhead. So of course, everybody knows the benefits and overheads for humans, but yeah, bots also have charging and maintenance stations. They have these protective equipment and probably accessories that the bot needs to have. But this other part here you said is that there's going to be bot minders. So these are people, humans, that need to control and manage these bots. And so that's the nice thing about what you've done, Scott, is in the past conversations, you have always, for every 5 bots, there should be 1 human. And at first it might be 1 human to manage 2 or 3 bots, and eventually 5 bots, and eventually 1 human for 10, just to manage them, right? Control them. And if something happens, especially in the early years. So you've added that into your sessions.
Yes.
Any comments on that one as I set the next slides up?
Now, part of it, the reason we gave that, we called it salary, taxes, and then, benefits and overhead, is because we have kind of those same buckets for human labor. And in order to be able to kind of compare them, we said, well, let's just give it the same name for Optimus, so you sort of understand what we were talking about these things. Obviously, Optimus doesn't get benefits, but Optimus does have other overhead and charges, just like you would for normal human labor. And again, it's going to be some things like protective equipment. There's going to be certain types of gloves Optimus is going to have to wear, certain kind of garments, depending on if it's a clean room environment, you're going to have to wear a white lab coat, just like a human would. Or if you're doing painting or something like that, you want to be able to protect the bot a little bit. So there's going to be things like that. Now, the thing with the minders is that maybe it should be in there and maybe it shouldn't, because to be fair, maybe we should be including the cost of a manager towards all the human labor, because that manager is kind of out there. And in the end, maybe it's a 1-to-1 swap between the floor foreman and the minders. So it may be an absolute wash there, but we just said, let's not make that assumption because we're not sure what's going on. Now, there's going to be 2 types of minders. There's going to be the ones that are kind of part of the deal, the $60K that comes from Tesla to make sure the thing's up and running and doing everything all right, and maybe doing some, normal kind of maintenance that only Tesla can do. And then there's going to be the other human minders that make sure it's performing correctly during the operations, and if there's an issue, to be able to make some corrective action and do maybe normal preventive maintenance. Make sure it gets charged right, all those little things. So now I think in the model, CERN called them shepherds, but he spelled it with 2 P's. It's like, there's a shepherd like that as the last name, but I think the shepherd he's talking about is with an H, which comes from a sheep herder. So that's that's what the
I was laughing. I'm laughing because I'm reminded of Star Wars, where you have generals and you have the different levels. Maybe you can have a bot supervisor, and he's got got little stars. I'm the smarter
Grievous or something like that, right? Yeah, I mean, eventually you may have managers which are like some other kind of bot, but I'm thinking, to begin with, they actually are going to be humans. And
the question is, the question is like, okay, so you're in the normal workforce right now, we have managers to humans. And the question is, do you need more managers to bots or less managers? Because like I said, it could just be the same managers. Instead of managing humans, now they're managing bots. But it's a question is like, right? I would assume that over time you have less managers needed for the bots because they won't make stupid mistakes.
Yes.
Once you trained them once, they figured it out. It's just going to over time be less and less need to manage
It's
something like
it
this.
yeah. It's going to be like FSD. You need to have a driver there just in case. It's going to be
Okay,
like that for a while, and then you'll have
gotcha.
that transition.
Okay, all right. Let's take a look at your charts here. Tell me what we're
Okay.
looking at. This is for one shift. This is the Scott model for bots. Tell me what we're
Yes.
looking at.
Okay. So if we look on the left side, we can see what it cost annual for minimum wage job. So 15 hours per hour, $15 per hour. And now that means the take home pay is around 31,000. Well, the alleged take home pay, there's still taxes to pay on top of it. But then the blue bit is the additional taxes that the employer has to pay. And then the orange bit is like the typical overhead that you would have for an
This is a
employee.
human. A
This
human
is for a
paid
human.
15
So,
hours. Okay.
yeah, so that means at minimum wage. Now, in Tesla and a lot of other factories, they don't start out at $15. It might be closer to $25 or something like that. But we just want to let's
Okay.
go really look at 15-hour job where maybe Optimus is able to come in. So maybe it's in a restaurant or something like that. So you're looking at, I think, somewhere, if you add those things up, maybe $45,000 a year or something like that. So if you look at Optimus, now Optimus, we're assuming 60,000 already. So
Yeah.
Optimus is already more than the minimum wage job. And then there potentially could be taxes of 33%, which would be close to another 20,000. And then we just kind of said, well, benefits and overhead will just lump in like another 10. So
Okay.
you'll see that Optimus doesn't quite compete in a one shift model.
Okay.
But it could compete if you decide, well, we're going to lease it for 40,000 or 30,000 or something like that. It's really a business decision. And then if you start looking at like, second, third, or fourth tier kind of salaries, then you begin
Can
to see that it starts to compete in the one shift model. But once
you
you go to the
pause for
two
a sec?
shift
Yeah.
model, it immediately becomes favorable to do something like that.
Okay. So very interesting analysis because I think it was the general assumption that most people made that, okay, bots are here, bots are going to replace the
Mhm.
restaurant worker immediately. That they would say that that's the first thing that they would do. But in your analysis, if you made your assumptions, it may not work out for the 15 hourly wage people unless
Yeah,
it's multiple shifts. That's the
yeah.
critical
And
distinction.
and it and again, it will come down to how productive Optimus is compared to that $15 worker. Is Optimus actually able to replace two of them or one? And the other thing you have to remember is that Optimus will have some minders, but sometimes you have to have additional workers anyways to cover breaks and everything else. So, one example I like to think of is, if you're running a supermarket that's 24/7, and let's say you have three checkout lines, and it's very busy there 24/7. So people are always coming through. So you've always got to have three cashiers there. Well, the cashiers, they have to take a break every now and then. So that means either the manager comes in and spells one of the cashiers, or you have like a fourth one that just kind of rotates around to make sure they all have a break. So in some cases, in order to man those, three stations, which in this case are cashier lines, you might need an additional worker to be able to do that. So that's something you've got to factor in a little bit. And then,
Yeah.
to take that analogy a little bit further, we can look at the U-scan. It's like, wow, we put that on over there, and now we don't need those cashiers anymore, but we do need a human minder to make sure everything's going all right. Now, what's a little bit wrong in this case is that the human minder is there as a check on the humans to make sure they're checking out and using the bots, which are the scans,
Yeah.
correctly. Whereas obviously in the factory, it's really the other way around. It's not, you're not checking on whether humans are doing it right, you're checking on whether the Optimus is doing it right. So now suddenly you're able to reduce your headcount a little bit more that way. So it may be that that $15 worker doesn't really cost you $15 for whatever the operation that you need. Because in the end of the day, that's what you're not really thinking about how much labor you need. You're thinking about the things that have to get done in order to make sure everything works right, and then how much labor you need for that. So you don't just say, I'm going to hire three workers and see what they can do. It's like, no, I've got three operations. How many workers do I need for that?
Right.
But let's, keep it fair 1-to-1. And then what ends up happening is that when you go from the one shift to the two shift model,
Should I do
then
that now?
suddenly,
Do you want to
yeah, so
speak first to
yep,
the
sure.
$30, the $50? What do you want to say there?
Yeah, so you see, again, it's very close to the $30. And once we start talking about the higher wage, like the $40 or $50, then, Optimus makes sense immediately in one shift.
Okay.
And again, remember, we're assuming lots of costs for Optimus, which are probably maybe a bit higher than they should be. So you could
In
easily
a
get it to compete with a $30 if you really wanted the $15.
in a factory like Tesla's auto factory, what is their wages?
I think the minimum is 25, and then it goes up from there. So, easily you're competing not against $15, but closer to like $30.
So it's possible that
Yep.
already in Tesla's factory, as an example, these
Mhm.
factories, they're not being paid
Yeah.
15. The
Yeah.
15, like
Yeah.
we said, is more like the
Right.
retailers. And okay,
And,
interesting.
and,
So
and again,
let's,
if we look at
yeah,
this, it's, this is the external model. This is what it would be like if we
yeah,
wanted to deploy it outside of Tesla. Within Tesla,
right. Yeah,
they may have an internal lease rate just to make sure the money kind of flows, from one department to another to cover the cost there and for tax reasons and everything else. But they probably won't be charging 60,000, internal lease rate. Maybe it's 30 or 40 or something like that. But at some point they want to have some numbers going around to be able to prove that yes, Optimus is saving us money. It's not costing us a lot more money. We're able to do this internally, and that Optimus department over there is actually making a profit. So it becomes an internal profit center. And that would be done with coming up with whatever the internal lease rates are going to be inside of Tesla as they start deploying.
okay. Let's take a look at the 2-shift model.
Yes. So the 2-shift, you see the Optimus on the right side gets a little bit shorter because the numbers for them are going up. So now that the $15 per hour minimum wage is suddenly getting very close to $100,000 a year. So right away, it makes sense that when you have 2 shifts, you're going to want to lease Optimus. So if you're, 5 days, 8 hours a week, then you'll probably still do it, the
8
normal
hours
way.
a day. Yeah.
But
So
once you start to go to a 2-shift model,
yeah,
right away.
this 8-hour a day shift is quite common. And we just heard from the Walter Isaacson book that he mentioned that there was a comment there that these Tesla bots can be charged for 16 hours, can work for 16 hours before it needs to be charged. So
That's
it could
amazing.
very easily be doing 2 shifts. And why wouldn't it be doing 2 shifts? And then therefore you can have one Optimus replace 2 people. And all of a sudden it's already, like you said here, it's already equal.
Yeah.
Yep.
And any other thing is that if you need to charge Optimus during the day, it would be very quick. So you might have breaks anyways that because there are still people that are there and that the Optimus can't work because it's still dependent on the
I
humans
see.
doing something. And you would be able to, like, in 15 minutes, give it what it needs to have to make it to the
Yeah.
end of the day or do the full charge. The other thing is a lot of people have asked about, wow, shouldn't Optimus have like a swappable battery pack and everything else? And it's like, well, you don't want to do that because, that means more mechanics, more costs, everything else would kind of fail. It's everything is just kind of bundled in. It's a structural torso. And Optimus is the swappable battery pack. That's the whole idea. So kind of going back to what I said is like, you got 3 lines with the cashiers and you got a 4th one in reserve. You would probably do the same thing if for some reason you need to keep on charging all your Optimus, but the ratio might be, I've worked it out before, closer to 8 or 9 to 1. So if you have 8 Optimus, you get a
Wow.
9th one in there, and they just
Yeah.
keep on spelling them. It's like, hey, taps the other one's like, go get charged. And when it comes back, it taps the next one. The children, yeah, your turn, go get charged. And so that's what you would do for swappability is they just go in there because they are a 1-to-1 replacement.
Interesting. And you don't need to tap. They can talk to each
Yeah,
other.
but I mean, they might just do it so the humans that are around are like understand what's going on.
I love you. You're so smart. You're so cool. Okay, I like the way you're doing. So that was a very good point that people do take half an hour lunch breaks, 15-minute breaks,
And
and so
the other
this is
advantage
beyond
that
60. This is
you
beyond
might
16
not,
hours.
you might run your factory without that, without the 15-minute morning break, without
Yeah.
the 30-minute lunch break. I mean, the factory will just keep running and running the whole time. And you won't have the fact that, when you stop things, you've got to kind of get it ramped up again and again. So you won't have that. So you might see that you're squeezing out more productivity by just running it nonstop. The question is like,
Interesting.
the lines might get tired. You might be, oh, okay, it needs to take a break. It's overheating. Let's let it slow down and cool down a bit and go charge the Optimus while we make sure that everything on the production line is fine.
Okay, so that's 15, and then when you compare that to anything higher, like you said, 30, 2 shifts versus 1, boy, it just
Yep.
makes so much sense at this point to just to replace if it can do 2 shifts, and it's very likely going to be able to do 2 shifts. That's what we just said.
Yes, yes. And yeah, very likely to do 2 shifts. And again, if you go to 3 shifts, then you maybe just have like an extra Optimus or two to kind of fill in for the charging,
Wow.
and you will have enough time between them. So when you look at the 3 shift, yeah, it just dominates on the cost savings that are going to be there. And there's even a 4 shift model, because 3 shift does not necessarily mean 24/7. A lot of people would be thinking about a 3 shift is more of a 7 day, 16 hours kind of thing. So you have like the weekends that are going to be in there. So you could think of it sort of that way. And when you have a 4 shift, that's like when you're just running the whole time, 24/7, everything else, and you've got the A, B, C, and D shifts that are moving around. They're all working 4 days a week to try to fit that whole thing in. But if you think about it, two shifts is basically 80 hours. And then you throw another 40-hour shift in there, it's 120. Well, you still have 48 hours left over in the week that you can put in there. So, out of 160 hours. So, yeah, you could even run it at 4 shift, and then it gets, as Sermon say, even nuttier. But let's cap it at 3. That's enough. Sometimes the factories need a rest, and sometimes it's just, that's too much supply. There's probably not enough demand for whatever it is you're producing.
Well, okay, so I do need to just I think you guys are making an assumption, and I know you guys are right, because you know this, but I don't, which is, can a bot actually work straight 3 shifts?
Oh, yeah, it's going to need maintenance. But again, if you go to 4 shifts,
yeah,
you still have a couple hours left over. You've got
like
8
if
hours.
it continued to do the same movement for so long, continuously for many days, like 24 hours a day, it's not going to wear down. It's not going to.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You're going to need preventive maintenance. And typically that's what they do. That's, some of the odd shifts they have on the weekend are about preventive maintenance, and that you go through everything, like all the machine tools and everything else. You go in, and after so many hours, you go in and you check everything else, just like you do with your car. You're going to do an oil change, check out the brakes, do everything else. And so that goes on in factories all the time. They know what those schedules are. The bot would need to do it. But again, if the bot is cheap enough, you just kind of swap one out while the other one's, visiting the nurse and getting everything kind of checked out and what's going on, whether it's going to be charging anything else. And again, even with a 4 shift model, there's still an extra 8 hours left over the week. And 8 hours is more than enough time to do preventive maintenance on it. And so you would probably have a person that is always working, if you've got a huge fleet of these bots, that's just always going through it. Now that might be someone from Tesla, because I remember the old days when you had like deck computers and stuff like that, that we had in our university, is that we had some systems guys that kind of ran it daily, on a daily basis. But once a week, there was a guy that came from deck that came out and checked the disk drive and this and that, because he was sort of a qualified tech to be able to do that. And so you might sort of see the same thing, is that you'll have the internal guys that will just kind of look at a few things, dust some things off, go in there,
more money
blow
for
some
Tesla
chips out or whatever. And then Tesla comes in and it's going to check some of the fittings and stuff like that. Because I think a lot of those things are heavy duty and will last. There's a few places where I've got my suspicions on how long before they start wearing out, where they're going to see some issues. And I'm sure they are as well. And so they would be looking at that. And it may be there are these things that are just really easy to swap out. Just like, we know every 3 months you just got to pop these joints out and put a new one in there, but the motors and everything else will be fine.
Okay. And just to remind folks, so first of all, you are a robotics expert. You have co-founded 2 robot companies in the past. And these are the, what do you call these? Industrial robots in the in factories.
Robots,
and they're the ones that constantly move and just never stop moving. And so, you're already very familiar with how these kind of non-stop robotic movements, same movement over and over again.
And they carry heavy payloads and everything else. But they're designed in many ways. They're very, very beefy to be able to do that. And they do have these schedules to be done, but usually, their mean time between failures is like 40,000-60,000 hours or something like that. I mean, they can go quite a long time. Okay. So they're pretty rugged and pretty durable. I mean, you'll have some that are running for years and years and years without any real issues, just a little bit of preventive maintenance here and there. And then you'll have others. You always have a lemon. It's like, whoop, something suddenly snaps and you got to go in and replace it. But a lot of them, they're very reliable and last years and years. in pretty rugged conditions. I mean, there's some nasty situations. I mean, spot welding, it's rugged. I mean, you see some of those robots when they're done and their arms are just blackened. You know, the paint job is just like, you know, from all those spot welds they've been doing for years. Same is going to happen like arc welding, and you have others that are doing forging or tending or something like that in very hot environments. They last. Paint
Yeah.
robots too. You know, I remember having to do a program for Chrysler a few years ago, and I was shocked to see this was like around 2008, 2009, somewhere like that. And they were talking about programming these paint robots that were installed in the 1980s. Like, I was shocked that they still work. They're still everything. Like, there's no need to replace it. So, you know, normally they swap them out every 5 years or something like that for the next platform, because, you know, the whole capital outlay comes out for that. It's like, oh, this is a free tool, everything. But think about paint shops, they are so finicky. It's, you know,
And
the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
no, and it's still going on, yeah. And then let's
Yeah.
remind people what your estimate is to for the cost of the bot itself to Tesla for making the bot. Are you still saying $10,000, or are you thinking higher?
Yeah. It's you know, they'll in the early, and it depends on how you look at in the early days. When you really look at the cost of everything that's going in there, yeah, it's like probably less than $10,000 COGS right there. You know, there's obviously all the design overhead, a lot of other things, and some other stuff that might kind of come in there. But yeah, the bill of materials and throw one is probably under 10,000.
And
Might
one of
be,
the
you know, it's going to come down to the motors, the actuators, and how much those are going to cost, and how good that line is when they kind of get it up and figure it out. But yeah, I'm sure it is. And Elon was very confident. He said that, you know, under 20 when someone asked him, you know, less than a car, you know, probably under 20. And of course, he's not talking day one, but eventually you'd be able to do it. And it would be affordable. So yeah, they have, and they keep on stressing every time. I've gone over, you know, the video again. Every time I look at it, it's like seeing it for the first time. And they just hammer home the whole idea that it's being designed for manufacturability. That we're only putting in exactly what we need because we don't want to make it more complex than it needs to be. We want to make sure we keep the cost down and it's scalable and everything else. They keep on saying that again and again and again. So it's designed to be low cost.
Yeah. And then obviously one of the biggest value proposition that Tesla has, the competitive differentiator is scale. If you can make 100,000 bots, all of a sudden the cost per bot is going to go down. If you're buying those parts at scale, you're manufacturing so many of them, you can just basically reduce that price. And so that's where the race is really against competitors. Is they can make 100 bots, 1,000 bots, but it's going to cost them, 3 times more than Tesla can because they're making 100,000 bots. And so you can't catch up. They'll just keep going 1 million bots versus when you finally get your 100,000 factory going. So, okay, let's take a look at your spreadsheet here. So let's take a look at the actual numbers. And so this was what you originally started with.
Right.
Did you want to explain
this at all? That's my original spreadsheet made by an engineer. Very simple assumptions along there. Different wage structures there with what I was finding out would be the normal FICA and the overhead. And we sort of shown that before. And this one was trying to see what the potential cost savings could be to Tesla overall, looking at like the number of bot minders you need to have and how many bots you need to do. So in this one, it was like for each human operation, you might need 2 bots because they're really slow. And that maybe for every 5 bots, you need to have a human operator that's being paid at $50 and everything else. And so looking at those and the number of stations you might have within a Tesla factory and everything else, we were looking at the cost saving, could, with very conservative numbers there, be in the order of like $100 million or 88 million right there. So that's the potential savings that you would have within one factory. And of course, it could be a lot higher when the bots are more efficient and everything else, and if they're replacing more high wage jobs that are in there. But that's a substantial amount of money that can help pay the Optimus project itself right there. So at least you break even on that. And when it improves and everything like that, you can easily show those savings to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars per year. So that's just what it would be within Tesla and how it affects the margins. But the thing is, there's only so much money you can save in Tesla. I mean, they've only got so many jobs, right now. They don't have an unlimited number. So you can come up with really impressive numbers. And, maybe you can eventually get to, Tesla can save $1 billion internally. So you can save that. However, you can always make unlimited amounts of money. Saving unlimited amounts of money is very difficult because you've only got so many costs. So when you start looking externally, which is something that CERN has definitely done, that's when you see those real nutty numbers that you get in the hundreds of billions and sometimes trillions of dollars coming in, because there's so many other companies out there in which, in effect, you are saving them money. So their would then be coming to them. Now, I gave that model to CERN, and he then knew how to clean mine up and make things, put in better cost structures and understanding, the FICA and some of the other payroll taxes a little bit better, because mine was maybe a bit simplistic. So he's used to using those numbers. And like I said, he spelled shepherds a little bit wrong there, but that's okay. So he calls them shepherds, I call them minders. And this model is a bit more sophisticated. And from it, he was then able to generate those graphs that you saw. And if you looked at those graphs, they would have looked very familiar, because you've seen the CERN model and the bots model and the Hume's model. He sort of has the same kind of backgrounds, and he likes setting up for that. So so that's his spreadsheet, just to sort of show an idea of how he took it from being a rather simplistic model to one with a lot more assumptions built in. And the assumptions were, again, how many humans to how many bots, what was a group going to be like. And that's kind of the explanation on that, to understand what's behind the model.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, we don't need to go through the detailed numbers, but it's what generated the graphs, and just to show that you actually,
Yes.
you and CERN actually went and tried to calculate, like, even as
Yes.
closely as possible as FICA and other benefits and so forth. But okay, very
And
interesting.
the taxes, how
And
much
the
are you going
taxes.
to, is the bot going to pay taxes? So
Yeah.
like, you just change all those numbers in there, and you can change the
Yeah.
assumptions. And I think he articulated in your interview that there's going to be this adjustment that everyone's going to be sort of feeling, what's going to be the right level to have the taxation to sort of replace the coffers of what are being lost, and what's going to be acceptable. And we don't know where that is, but there's going to be some movement. And the other thing is, I think it's helpful to have this discussion early on, before everyone sort of realizes, oh, we're going to have to tax these things. And they just kind of come up with something that isn't really well thought out. So I know there's probably some policymakers that are thinking out there, but again, the policymakers are kind of in an ivory tower and may not really be thinking things rationally. So it would be worth, within the Tesla community, to start this discussion. And so I've already had that with CERN, I've had it with you, I've had it also with Bradford. And, hopefully we start working on that as a community to say that, yeah, we think this is probably what the models are going to be like, or what they will be like. And that when the policymakers start coming around to that, then, we'd be able to show that this is probably a fair taxation model if you're going to go that route. And that's
Yeah.
the other thing I like about the Tesla community, is that when I needed help to be able to make the spreadsheet very good, I could reach out to someone like CERN. So it's like, we've got this incredible brain trust when it comes down to being able to answer questions and everything. And that's one of the things I really love about this community.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, obviously, CERN himself has created a bots model, and he's looked at it at a very, really like a detailed level, but also very high level business model for Tesla, the business model for the taxation for the state, the city, the business model for each of the customers. And then he came up with a bunch of assumptions. What you then did was really fine tune it a little bit more in terms of, per shift, what would actually happen, how many, what the assumptions are for human minders, you call them. And then even just that fine tuning of what will happen at the very beginning. At the beginning, they'll be slower. Bots are slower, and you'll need 2 bots to replace 1 human. Eventually they become really fast. What skill level? So tell me just a little bit of that. What skill level are we thinking here? Just a little bit more detail about that. Like, can it do, it might be able to flip burger, I guess, but they already have these
might be able
robots
to.
that flip burgers. But what
Yeah.
level will it max out before you need it's going to be like, several years before it can have that brain or that skill?
I think that sort of the two tasks I look at is one, when's it ready to fold your laundry? Because it turns out getting robots to fold fabric is pretty tricky, or do something like sewing. That's very complex. But there are many other operations which are pretty straightforward. And of course, in a production line, things are designed to be very easy to do. And it appears there was a rather interesting teardown of the Model Y that was looking at how it goes together. And it is so simple. It's like almost anyone can put it together. And it was mentioned again and again. It's like, it's almost like it's designed to be built by a bot. So,
Mm.
there are going to be fasteners that have to be put in, but the fasteners are easily accessible, which is a good thing anyways, because a lot of times the cars, the fasteners are in such a position, it's very difficult to get to, even for a human operator. So they've already designed that. So it should be very simple to do a lot of those kinds of tasks. Anything that requires maybe a lot of dexterity, and, caution, some things, might be a little while. I'm not sure if I wanted to bring a drink to me right now, because it'll probably walk a little bit like that and spill the drink by the time it gets to the table. But that's going to improve with time. And it's not something you're going to see in the home yet. I think it takes a while before you get there. But within a lot of manufacturing environments, it could be there. And again, you may end up seeing in some commercial applications where it's doing a lot of sort of the back room kind of things. Now, maybe not necessarily customer facing at first, but a lot of toting of things around, lifting things up and just bringing it here and there. It should be able to do that. And again, it comes down to the hand design, how good it's able to manipulate different kinds of tools, and how good the AI is as far as being able to teach a lot of these different tasks and for it to be able to infer and understand that. And that will probably come pretty quick. I mean, it's going to be, they're not quite there. And then once they get to this particular point, it just takes off. And kind of as James Dalma refers to, is like you build that foundation and it seems like you're working on it forever and you're getting nowhere. And then suddenly, almost overnight, it just is able to do incredible things.
Okay, let's talk about these hands then, because
Mm-hmm.
this came out from Walter Isaacson's biography of Elon Musk.
Yes.
He had a couple photos here. So these are the robot hands. Do you want to explain this photo and then we'll go to the next one?
Yeah, part of the reason I wanted to do it is that the first video we did together talking about Optimus, we had a little bit of a section there about the hands and where I pointed a bunch of things out. And this sort of illustrates it that, from this initial design that, yeah, we were kind of right about those things. The first was like, identical finger lengths. And the reason they want to do that is they want to have common finger drive units. They want to keep the cost down. So
Yep.
the fingers are the same length. They reduce one of the knuckles. So you only have two in the finger as opposed to three, all identical drives that are able to fit in there, packaged really nicely, but you'll see the offset that's in there to give the illusion that it's kind of like a human hand where, the middle finger is sticking out a little bit more than the others, but they're identical in that way. So again, keep the part costs down, simplify everything again, and make it very, very simple. And I think there's another image that maybe also show what are some of the potential benefits that are there. So again, the focus is part reduction. All right. So reduce the parts. We don't have different parts for each finger, all identical fingers. That improves assembly time because you're assembling the exact same thing. The controller packaging basically is the same because it's in each one of those drives, and the sensor packaging is also very simple. And it's designed to have an external glove for, intrusion protection, gripping of surfaces, and cladding. So the intrusion protection, to make sure dust and, any other things, chips, whatever might be in the environment doesn't get caught in the mechanism, because you can see it's a very exposed mechanism. So you would need a glove for that. And again, different kinds of gloves will help in gripping. And we've seen that in some of the videos. It looked like they had some special, almost like thimbles on the end of the fingers to be able to grab the hex nut that they were bringing up. And so you need that sometimes for certain applications to have the right kind of grip. And that's what we also threw in some of the overhead for Optimus, is the fact that you may have some consumables like that. Depending upon the operation that you're doing, you have to make sure Optimus is properly fitted, and gloves can be disposable after a while. And, they may actually be. It may be that, after a couple of shifts or something like that, they wear out, or maybe they last a year. Who knows?
Wow. Okay. So you and I have done so many videos. We have compared the top 10 robots that are out there. We've done deep dives on Fourier, Digit, Boston Dynamics. We've even done bot videos just on one of those. And they look very impressive because they can do so many things. What we noticed was you said you always look at three things when you look at a bot. One is the ability to walk, whether it has hands, and its brain. And what we notice is that many of these companies don't have all three, and most of them don't have the AI component. But what we also have noticed, a big difference between Tesla and anyone else, is their focus on manufacturability. Because, I don't know if people know this, but we pointed it out in one of our videos. The actual CEO of Boston Dynamics has basically said that their bot that they're showing off, Atlas, that can do all these things, it's a demonstration bot. It's for R&D. It's not designed and built for mass scale or sell. They're not planning to sell this thing. And people think, oh, they're the big competitor. Can you not see what Boston Dynamics? The CEO himself has said we can't bring the cost down because we just wanted to show that it can do these things, not that we were planning to sell this thing. And so if you're planning to sell this, Tesla is really focusing on the design such that it's reproducible, and versus the other ones we saw, like we pointed out, one of the Chinese bots, for example, different hip sizes, different shoulder lengths, everything is all different because it's just doing something, but it's not designed for a million of them being produced and having the cost down. So that was why we showed you this. Yeah.
Yes. And I think, Elon has harped on that many times. Again, when I listen to all these things, he keeps on talking about it. And he brought it up in Investor Day, first, leveraging the fact that they have the AI computer that they will be able to do the training for the bot. But he came back and says, primarily we're a manufacturing company. We know how to build things. So right from the beginning of the design process, we're thinking how we're going to build this, how can we build this at scale and everything else. He kept on saying, this is the advantage we have over everyone else, is that we will be able to produce these, faster, cheaper, and, much greater numbers than anyone else. And again, the CEO of Boston Dynamics admitted that, they weren't thinking about how to make it easy to manufacture. That's kind of coming in now, and they know nothing really about manufacturing. They're beginning to learn right now. So, the first thing is that they didn't design it for manufacturing. Second, they don't really know how to manufacture. And that's all the skill set they're trying to bring in to be able to do it. And I think eventually that they will get there. But that's the advantage that Tesla had, is like, we already know how to build things. They already know how to build a lot of the parts that are in there, like the motor drives, which are unique. Again, something Elon says again and again and again is that they could not find any off-the-shelf actuators that would work for what they needed. And part of it, and again, when I looked at it, is they were looking at two things on the off-the-shelf actuators. One is the capability, making sure you have the right thing, and also the cost. They were very sensitive on what the cost of those actuators are. So internally, they already know how much it's going to cost them to be able to produce these things compared to trying to buy anything even close to that in the market. And there seems to be a big difference. And then there's a performance capability. And I'm sure they're looking at two things in performance capability. One is that it's able to deliver the torque and the speeds that they need when they need them, and it's durable, that it's going to last for, not thousands or hundreds of thousands, but millions of cycles. And they already know how to do that because, the Model 3 motors are able to go 1,000,000 miles. I think there have already been some of that in the Model S and everything else. So those motors are capable, and the actuators in Optimus will not be under quite as severely a stressed environment as it is like driving a car. They may be operating longer, but they're not going to be doing jackrabbit starts all the time and everything else that people like to do with it. So that is a huge advantage that they have. And again, after I looked at some of the other bots that were out there that were very interesting in seeing what I call the Opticons, the Optimus mannequins that are starting to show up in some of the showrooms, and looking at it in person, really impressed upon me. It's like, yeah, the elegance of the solution. I mean, I'd already seen kind of from a distance, and looking at the pictures and the videos of what they were doing and understanding, but huge appreciation when I begin to look at it. That's like, yeah, that's I see why they're doing it. I see why that's a really good solution, and why going forward the robot's probably going to have maybe more capabilities than we really think it has right now or be capable of. And it's a pretty good path for them to evolve on. And finally, Elon has said that, it's the first generation, and if we come up with some better ideas, we're going to jump right on them right away. And he knows that the hand model is not the best hand model, that it's going to improve over time. And you talk about swappable hands, depending on what you want to do. But they want to make sure they get something out there, that you don't sit there and try to design the perfect hand, because if you do that, you'll never get anywhere. So you come up with something that's good, and then you get data from it. And then from what you learn, you find out how can we improve the next round. So there are better robotic hands out there, but they're very costly. And their whole idea is and they're difficult to manufacture. So we want manufacturability. And that's what that image from Walter Isaacson's book is about, is okay, how do we build hands that are very easy to put together, that are inexpensive? So that is not the costly part of Optimus. The motor drives are not going to be the costly part of Optimus, because Tesla knows how to build those things. it's built to be assembled very easily. I mean, if these parts just kind of showed up in a box for Christmas, the kids would know how to put it together.
Um, so it's September right now, and
Mhm.
I'm very excited for November. Do you remember what Elon said
Yeah.
about what's going to happen in November?
Yes, yes, yes. So the first Tesla bot with the Tesla designed actuators, which kind of threw me off when he said that because I thought the ones that are out there were the Tesla design, and I think he means the ones that are actually coming out the production line. So these are going to be the real McCoy that are going in there, and they might be a little bit different. Who knows? You know, they may have learned a lot from it and what they want to improve. Because I already can see all sorts of things they can change because some of those motors are kind of like a jack of all trades, you know, kind of master of none, and that they're designed to be in so many different places. They have additional bits and bobs that are kind of sticking out on the flanges where everything is that you seem like you would want to remove and get out of there. But when you're kind of prototyping really quickly, you're like, don't worry about it. Because remember, design, you know, the design principles, you know, down at the bottom is optimize as last, you know, get all the other stuff going and making sure that's right. And then you worry about that. And that kind of shows up in the Optimus models that you see in the mall. You can kind of look at a few things. It's like, why is that there? Why is that there? And it's like, this thing is here because it's needed somewhere else, but they got to put it in there just to make sure it's also in case that motor ends up over there as opposed to here. So it seems like there will be a lot of places that they can streamline the production, maybe bring costs down, but they're not going to worry about that for the first 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000. Once they are ready to crank it up, they will streamline it. And that will make sense. And yeah, is that the Optimus robots are in many Tesla showrooms, usually showrooms that are going to be associated with a mall because I understand that if they have foot traffic of at least 5,000 per day passing by, then they get a Optimus bot to kind of put in the showroom to attract people. And it's a 3D printed model from, you know, the actual CAD that's been assembled that is dimensionally correct. And I hope to do a couple of events at a couple of showrooms in, you know, the coming weeks if anyone happens to be around there. We got one coming up on the 24th in Orlando at the Mall of Florida that we'll be doing something there. And if anyone who is a member of the Tesla Owners Club Florida, you can look it up on the events page. And I look forward to seeing everyone there. And we'll just kind of take a look and see what it looks like and understand the mechanics of what's going on. And then we just have to hope the brains are able to kind of follow up with the mechanism.
Okay. Yeah, what he said was by November, the Tesla design actuators should be ready by then, he's hoping. But once it is, what he then said was that then we'd be able to start scaling this in
Yes.
larger numbers. And so what
Yes.
really seemed to have happened is they like you said, they delayed, they just wanted to sit back and spend several more months making sure that they design things properly. But like you said earlier, it's designed for manufacturability. And so while we had assumed that there would be at least 500 or 1,000 by the end of this year, that's not the case. But
Yeah.
what the other surprise for us was that, well, it went by November, by the end of this year, it's going to be ready for scale. And then at that point, they're going to start producing this in larger
Yes.
numbers for next year.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're still working on, you know, handmade ones right now. But they seem to be almost ready. I mean, November is a fantastic date. It's like, what? So
That's why they don't have a huge fleet. So going back to, when was it, April, I think he said that they have, you know, about 10, you know, but it sounded like, you know, maybe 5 or 6 are ever operating and the others are having to fix something here and there, but they've got enough parts for at least 10. And he said, you know, more each month. So they, you know, they may have added another 5 to 10 since that time, you know, whatever more means, is it 1 or 2 per month? But clearly they're not trying to ramp it up because it comes down to making the motors. And if you know, you don't want to have, you know, bespoke motors, it gets pretty tough. So they want to scale it up with a production line to be able to do it. And then they would start coming out a little bit faster. And they may have looked at some of the other parts and already have that scaled up for the castings for the legs and the arms and everything else. But if you think about it, there's 40 actuators in there. So that's a lot of motors for one bot. So if you had to build those things sort of by hand, that's a lot. And, you know, just the hands themselves are 6 of these little things. So you need to come up with some sort of a production line for that. And of course, before you do the production line, you want to make sure you really do like the motors that you have, and you're not going to have to suddenly change the design which is then going to change your production process. But what I'm more excited about with that November is that if that hits, then that means I expect there's going to be AI Day 3 around there somewhere. I mean, there's no rumors of it yet, but my expectation is it would be around there, and that maybe in October we start to hear some rumblings that it's coming, because they want to get the Cybertruck event on first.
Oh, it's coming. Yeah, AI
Yeah.
D3 is guaranteed. We're talking about the
definitely
largest supercomputer, Dojo. They just that's FSD version 12, which is just a revolution in neural nets. They're going to want to, make a big deal. All the AI improvements they're making in the bots.
It could be December or even January, because you're right. I kind of forgot about that. They might be saying, "Oh, Optimus is really good, but Dojo is this close. We want to have something with Dojo to really prove what it's doing." Because when we get that going, now Optimus is going to be doing somersaults, and FSD version 12 is just going to be phenomenal because they've got that. So I think you're right, is that you need to have sort of three things happen together. And when they're all ready, that's when they're going to be ready for it. Because they don't want to just announce things. It's not about Optimus. It's about the whole suite of everything.
It's
so
AI.
you're probably right there, is that, November, maybe Optimus will be ready, but maybe not, because maybe Optimus is going to be depending on Dojo. And if Dojo still needs to get to December before it's able to really start crunching this stuff, then maybe that pushes it back. And then again, let's make sure version 12 is, really able to do what we want. So now one of them is the bottleneck. I don't know which.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was fun. You always bring so much, expertise and knowledge, and it's been just a lot of fun going through every single one of these thoughts. And it is time. It is actually time for us to be, talking about the shifts and the taxes and the hands and all these things, because it is coming. It's here. We like we just said at the beginning, there's an explosion of bots. Every time there's a new bot, we get lucky because I get to show it to you, and we get to show it to the audience here, and we break it down and say, what do they look like? What can they do? We're going to be showing so many more videos of all these different bots. They're just coming. We are here. Thank you for doing that, Scott. That's good.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Herbert. Again, it's been a pleasure, and look forward to being back next week.
We'll do it next week.